ربنا لا تعجبني
Diretamente de Alagoas, estou aqui com a Sara, militante revolucionária da Síria, que concedeu a nós uma entrevista ao portal da Juventude do PSTU sobre o processo revolucionário na Síria, a importância da juventude, da luta das mulheres, e aí a gente pode agora aqui observar um pouquinho melhor a história desse processo aí tão riquíssimo e tão importante para a juventude do país e da importância da nossa aliança estratégica com os trabalhadores e com a juventude que luta em todo o mundo. Vamos lá? Hello, Sara. How are you?
Hello. Good.
Good. Nice. Sara, can you tell us about the reasons of the Syrian revolution and the current state of the mass struggle?
Yes, definitely. The reason that the Syrian revolution broke out is exactly the same as the reasons all the Arab revolutions broke out. The Syrian people took onto the streets in the Syrian revolution to oppose a very strong military dictatorship that has been ruling the country for the past 48 years. So this is primarily why it is the revolution of a people asking for democratic freedom, the right to express themselves, the right to organize, and the right to be opposing the regime in the streets.
Nice. And in your opinion, what's the relationship between the Syrian revolution and this process of Arab Spring?
I don't think it's a relationship, I think it's the same thing, because the Syrian revolution would never have started had the revolutions in Egypt and the revolutions in Tunis and in Libya and Yemen had not started. This is what motivated the Syrians and what gave them the courage to break the fear and to go down to the streets. Even the slogans of the Syrian revolution are the same as the slogans of the revolutions in Egypt and in Tunis. The people want to topple the regime. So the relationship is, first of all, in demands. It is the same demands, it is the same struggle, the same people, and the same kind of military oppression that we've seen. And so it is one revolution.
Yeah, nice. And tell us about the Free Syrian Army and the fight against the regime and the secret service. What the relation of the things and the comments are popular?
Okay. So the Syrian revolution first started out as a peaceful revolution, peaceful resistance, but then the more the Syrian people realized that unlike Egypt, the regime faced them with tanks, with military violence, with destruction, that the only way they could liberate themselves is by carrying arms. So this is how the Free Syrian Army developed. After 6 months of the revolution, people realized that it's not enough to go down to the streets and to be in manifestation and demonstrations. So small coordination committees formed in every revolutionary geography. These committees first were responsible for organizing demonstrations, organizing humanitarian aid, giving support to families that were dispossessed, that were disenfranchised. But then these committees started taking arms, and what formed first was a group of very spontaneous battalions that were defending and also trying to topple the regime. And then they transformed into units that were protecting freed zones that have been liberated from the regime's presence. And managing, and this is where the Syrian people started being able to democratically organize themselves and have a form of self-administration. The role of the Free Syrian Army was to protect these free zones from the military, from the intelligence services, from military aggression. And unfortunately, because the Free Syrian Army is very poorly financed and it doesn't have any heavy arms, so no matter how much you liberate and no matter how much you protect, the regime still has air control, and so even liberated areas are exposed to airstrikes from the military of the regime.
And the secret service, how do they, this relation with these comments?
The secret services is one of the most dominant characteristics of the regime before the revolution. It is exactly how the regime controlled all aspects of society, not only the political, but the social, the economic, every kind of organization, if there was to be any, whether it is women, whether it is youth, whether it is in universities, in unions, the workers, was infiltrated by a very strong presence of the secret services. Their role is not only to report on the activities of the citizens to the government, but their role is much more central. Their role is also to produce and play and divide the community. And to break any form of potential organization and movement among the Syrian community. After the revolution started, their role started to be much more militarized. It was no longer secret. The secret services became very visible. They started going down to demonstrations, beating people in demonstrations, taking photos of the faces of people in demonstrations, attacking the families of demonstrators. So the Syrian regime controlled Syrian society for the past decades through a very strong system of secret services.
And how do the students and the youth relate to the revolution, to this process?
The students and the youth particularly have been affected most violently by the regime's economic liberalization. They have very poor access to universities, and even when they have access to universities, you have hundreds and hundreds of students in one class. You have professors that are very violent. If you are not a student from the Ba'ath party, which is the party of the Syrian regime, you are not given any kind of scholarships, you are not given any kind of support, sometimes you are failed in classes. And so, the youth are the most important part of the revolution. In Arabic we say ثورة الشباب. It is the revolution of the youth. Even though like it is not only the youth that are participating, but it is the youth that is the more liberated. And very interestingly, it is the youth that has never experienced any kind of political form of organization or any politics, but nonetheless, the revolution would not exist without them. They're participating in demonstrations, humanitarian aid, cultural activities, music, drawings. Especially the most important role of the youth is transferring to the world and to other Syrians what's happening in Syria through the use of technology, filming, editing, producing newspapers, selling them in the streets. The youth is very important in the Syrian revolution.
Oh, really nice. And how do the everyday demands of the Syrian women express themselves in the current process of the regime?
Okay. The regime is extremely violent, particularly against women. Their women were an extremely important part of the revolution, not only in the traditional sense where men would go out and fight and women would stay in the home and, put plaster on the wounds. This is not it. Syrian women, all of them, have been very present in demonstrations. Demonstrations were the most important aspect of the revolution. Syrian women participated in more than one way, contributing to the revolution. They participated in humanitarian aid. Even a few days ago, we've heard that there is one Syrian woman who not only joined the Free Syrian Army, but who is a leader of one of the battalions. Their situation in Syria is very critical because Syrian women face a very conservative society, where the number one enemy is the regime because the primary exclusion is the political, but women face many other enemies. It is a patriarchal society, a society controlled by male and male dominance and male violence, like many parts of the world. And so women have two struggles that are connected to each other, because their first and most important struggle is the revolution, because it is by the revolution and by the victory of the revolution that they will have the right to organize and to articulate their problems and their despair politically. So Syrian women play a very, very important part in the revolution.
Nice. The left is split while dealing with the Syrian revolution. Certain sectors are with the dictator Assad, like Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro. How do you see their positions and the consequence of this position?
Yes, definitely the Syrian revolution and even the Libyan before it was very central in causing a split that clarified exactly not only the position but the nature and what the different parties, different sectors of the international and even local left believe in. Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro for us represent a very Stalinist form of the left that in fact were very important symbols for the Syrian people, particularly Fidel Castro and Chavez, where the people believed that these are representatives of the poor, representatives of a successful social movement. But then these people, not only Fidel Castro and Chavez, not only stood against the Syrian people and their revolution, but Chavez was financially supporting Assad's regime and sending petrol and diesel to the airplanes that were bombarding Syrian cities. The problem with such a position is that it not only attacks a popular social movement, but it also claims that Assad is an anti-imperialist, which is not true because Assad is a very strong ally of imperialism represented by the United States. he has been practicing economic liberalization for a very long time. The most important thing is the consequences, like you said, of these positions on the ground. The consequences are that the only voice, the only left that is heard back in Syria is the Stalinist left, it's castro-chavism. So the population and the revolting masses right now associate the left with people who want to murder them, with allies of Assad. So it makes the work of people like us and people who share similar opinions very difficult, because not only can we oppose the regime, or do we need to oppose the regime, but we also need to convince people that this is not the only left, that there is a very strong and very international left that is supporting the Syrian revolution and that is not against their rights, their democratic rights and their rights to armed struggle.
So, really nice. I'd like to congrats for the interview, and know that here in Brazil, PSTU is like an organization that supports the Syrian revolution. I think that's part of the international revolution that we have to construct every day. And the youth and the women and the workers of all the Brazil are like doing like a really good campaign. We expect to the second of solidarity, our process, because it's our process too.
Of course.
Your process.
Thank you very much. It is also our process, and it is also always, and I've said this before, that the reason and the importance of Brazil is precisely because of the righteousness and the justice of both the struggle of the youth and the struggle of the workers. And the most important voice to be heard in Syria is the voice of the Brazilian and the international leftists. Like with the general strikes in Europe, it should be heard in Syria. We should tell the Syrians that we are with their revolution, precisely so we can create an international alliance and maybe someday an international revolution.
Thank you.